Hi there, this is Erin Cooney. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Irish Dance Business Owners Podcast. Today I am joined by Emily Wolff. She is the director of McTeer Academy of Irish Dance, and today we're going to explore the topic of moving your class to a new studio location. So welcome, Emily, to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Erin. It's really exciting to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited about today's topic. I think it's going to be so helpful for everyone listening. But before we get into that, I would like to kind of know, although I think I do know already, what your backstory is a little bit about how you got into Irish dance and how you started teaching and then eventually, creating your own school.
Yeah, so growing up, I lived in St. Paul, and I just happened to live 2 doors down from Jim Brooks, who is the editor of the Irish Gazette, which is just a local newspaper in St. Paul that covers Irish and Irish American news in the Twin Cities and in Ireland. And he has a daughter that's about the same age as me. And when Riverdance started to become pretty popular in the early 90s, school came into town here in Minnesota, and he just told my parents, hey, I'm going to bring Em along to this dance class. My parents had no idea what they were getting themselves into. So I just sort of tagged along, and it really stuck. So I danced with the school Tiernanog under Katie Griffiths, who's the TCRG, for a few years, and then moved through a couple different Twin Cities locations. I danced at a competitive school. I danced at a performance-only school. And so I got a little bit of variety in my background. And I started teaching when I was in high school at the performance school, and eventually became the assistant director there. And then I graduated college and started to think about, where is this going to take me? What do I want to do? And I really looked at getting my teaching certification through the CLRG. And so took the test and thankfully passed after that really stressful 3 days. But even once I passed it, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do with it. I had been working with some adult dancers for some years, and so I was sort of casually working with them, looking around for practice space, and it just sort of evolved from there. I found a spot that was ready, and they wanted me to just take over the studio. They had been renting it out by the hour, and they just said, we don't want to do that anymore. If you have enough classes to fill it, you can use the studio space however you want to use it, which is pretty unheard of. And it was a beautiful space, and we were there for 2 years, and then we moved to a new location. But it's just been quite a journey growing the school, watching it evolve into this kind of blossoming and supportive community that it is.
And I kind of alluded to, maybe I knew some of your history,
Right.
but I didn't really. It's just that you and I had the same teacher growing up, and we weren't in the same class ever, but we performed together.
Right.
Yes. And
I know.
you were 8 years old when we performed together. So I don't know how old I was. I was 12, maybe around that age. And then now our Irish dance schools are very close in location.
Right. I know.
So we're going to dive into this topic about studio space, which I think everyone needs to know. So you kind of got to a point where you needed a bigger space for your classes, but you were mentioning that the timing wasn't quite ideal on this. And, maybe you could share your journey on what you learned trying to find a larger studio space and just kind of navigating that transition from one studio space to the other.
Sure. Yeah, so we were in our studio space in South Minneapolis in the Standish-Erickson neighborhood, and we had one studio in that space, and it was a fantastic spot. But when we moved into that location, we had 50 dancers, and then we had more than doubled at that point. So I knew that we were going to have to move because there's only so many hours you can hold classes. And if you can't hold 2 classes at once, there's only so much you can do and only so many kids you can have. And the demand was there and we were growing and the community was thriving. So I knew that it was coming. So I started to passively look for spaces. Obviously, there's only so many spots that will work for a dance studio. So I started to search around and see what was out there because location was a huge factor for us. And then I became pregnant with my first child at the same time. So I knew that moving that year was not probably the most realistic. So I had talked to my landlord about just extending our lease, that we do want to expand, and if they have other spaces that we could take over within the building, like there was another suite that we could potentially take over. So I started to talk to them about that and how we wanted to expand, but I'm pregnant. I don't want to do anything too big too fast. And they had kind of gone back and forth about, yeah, we'll renew your lease and, we can do a 6 months or something. And then it had gone back and forth. And finally, they gave me a final answer and they said, no, you can't renew your lease. And that was in March 2018. And I was due July 3rd. And our lease was up June 31st. So suddenly I had 3 months to find a space that was appropriate for a dance studio, and hopefully that it was in a similar neighborhood to where we were. Because once I realized that we were going to need to find a new space, and I made the announcement to the dance school that we were going to try and find a new space and move, the number one question and the number one concern was, well, where is it going to be? Because, they have to drive their kids to classes right after work, fighting traffic. And we have been Minneapolis school. We have been based in Minneapolis. That's been one of the core things that sets us apart, that we're right in the city. And much of our core demographic is kids from the Minneapolis school system and local neighborhood kids. So we really draw from the neighborhood. So location was one of the highest priorities when looking for space. But our timeline was short, and finding a large, wide open space in the city without columns in the middle of it, they just don't pop up too often. And so along the way, I did connect with a broker, which he was super helpful to help lay out our lease terms, do searches for us, take us through tours, walk us through pretty much every step of the way, even through construction of our new space ultimately. So we were able to find a space, but not without a few heartbreaks along the way. We had a couple spaces that we loved and then lost out at the last second. I'm sure home buyers in our area can relate to that. So there was a few spaces we found, but like I said, there's only so many options of wide open spaces that are appropriate for dance studios, because the other thing was looking for spaces that were commercially zoned, so we were even allowed to be in there. And then the other big piece of it too for Irish dances is a really, really loud sport. So that was always a concern of some landlords. And that's where we even lost out on some spaces because of our sound. So we luckily connected with fantastic owners. It's a partnership between two women, two friends, and they bought this building. It was a big project for them. It's an old building that they wanted to completely revive. It had been sitting sort of dormant, and they were looking for office spaces of their own. One of them owns her own construction company, Wonder Woman Construction, and the other is just her business partner. And so they wanted to revive the space, and there was a lot of just empty industrial-like space, but it wasn't industrial space. And so that was sort of a key factor, because when we were looking at the types of spaces, you would think a big wide open warehouse would be a fantastic spot to put a studio. But warehouse space is zoned differently than retail space or commercial space. So if you went and looked at industrial space, while it looked perfect for a dance studio, just wide open, huge, we actually couldn't put a dance studio there. And this was zoned for commercial or retail, which is ideal, but really hard to find in the city. And this was just sort of a hidden gem that happened to be in the right space. And it was half a mile from our old studio. So we were just so lucky to have been connected with these owners who wanted to rebuild the space and revive it at the time. And, you know, the timing just worked out, thankfully. But the process of moving did get complicated because 2 days before the lease was supposed to be signed for the new space. So we found it, we drew up the plans, everything was moving forward. But as we were finalizing those lease terms, my doctors told me that I had some complications and they had to induce me a month early. So my daughter was about 5 weeks early. And I had been teaching through the whole pregnancy, no problem. And then all of a sudden, I thought I had another month to prepare the studio and prepare for the move and pack everything up. And nope, time was up. So I had 2 days to pivot, to prepare the teachers and get the lesson plans, have a crew set up to start packing up the studio itself, the old studio, to get ready for the move. I had to sign the lease, you know, remotely, electronically, and just essentially pour my brain and heart and soul out into my computer because I was going to be out for a little while, and it came a little bit sooner than expected. So that was a surprise, and luckily my daughter was healthy and everything was fine. But if we didn't have a short enough timeline before, it bumped it up even sooner. And that's where having that broker, that commercial real estate broker, was so helpful and just necessary through that process to help make sure that the lease negotiations were still going on, even though I couldn't physically be there. So I had that representation for me while going through that really intense process, both personally and professionally.
Yeah. So with your leases, did you end up having an overlap between one space and the other space, or did you have to not have classes for a certain amount of time with the transition?
So we did have a little bit of an overlap of our leases. But what we actually ended up doing was there was a separate space in our new location that we utilized as a temporary space while they were building out our final space. So we ended up being in our temporary space for almost 5 months while the build out was happening, because the timeline to do a full, I mean, we had bare bones, just walls and some plumbing in the space that we ultimately ended up in. And so we spent a few months in a temporary space in the new location that we put up temporary flooring and threw a few mirrors, and it was a very rough space because we didn't want to pay for, you know, cosmetic updates to the temporary space. So that was our home for a few months, and it was it was tight and it was hard, but I think we just made it work, and communicating with the families to just hang on, and it's going to be glorious when we get to the new space.
Yeah. So during that transition then for those 5 months, was that around the time that your teachers kind of took over for you as well for teaching? So did you teach much in that temporary space yourself?
So I took some time off, not as much as I would have liked given the circumstances, We were heading into Irish Fair. So I took about a little over a month off. So not your typical maternity leave, but I had to be there for my business as well. So I came back part-time for the summer. I had teachers taking over a lot of the classes, but for some of my championship level students and my older dancers that we call them alphas at our school, those are the kids that I work with very closely. So I came back pretty soon and was overseeing all the renovations the entire time with a new baby. So it pushed me and it pushed my relationship with my daughter to, we were flexible. We were always flexible. We were always on the move. We were always adapting. I mean, I can't tell you how many trips to Home Depot that girl went to in her first 2 months of life. And so it was just, she was in the body carrier. She was in the car seat. She was in the stroller on the go, coming with me to the studio. And she was a very wonderful, flexible baby. And I don't know if that was by nature of her environment or just who she is. So it was the transition period, those 5 months. I did teach in that space. And it was difficult because we were trying to hold 2 classes at once in a space that was not 2 separate rooms. And so that was probably the hardest part about being in that transitional space. As you can imagine, Irish dance is a really loud sport. So sound bleeding and organization of the students, we made it work. But again, I just had to continually communicate with the families, just hang on. I know this is not ideal, but we are building out an absolutely beautiful space while this happens.
So this was actually like your second move, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So from your second studio space to now your third studio space where you are now, did you go from like 1 classroom to 2 classrooms? Was that the big switch, or did you have larger square footage within the classroom space, or how did you work that?
So it was both. We needed both a larger studio space because our individual classes were growing, and we needed more studio time in that, high priority time right after work or on the weekends. So we both made bigger studios and added 2 of them. So in our final space, we ended up having our largest studio, and then we have one that's about the size of our second studio space. So it was a big upgrade. We went from 1,700 square feet in the previous studio, and now we have over 4,000 square feet in our current space. So it was a very big expansion. And we had to do everything from put up walls, plumbing, electrical, everything. The space that it was before was just being used as a storage space. And so there was really nothing in there. And it had sort of been sitting dormant for years. It was just a woman who had been renting out the space from the previous owners for a long, long time. And then when the new owners came in and said, we want to create this place, this hub, artists and industrial workers. So the space currently has our studio. It also has the Rango Flamenco studio. We have flamenco dancers in our old temporary space. And then there's a woodworking company, and then they have their construction company. So they wanted to make it more of a thriving community. So while we were in the temporary space, they added bathrooms to our space. They added like a kitchenette to our space. We've got 2 waiting areas with observation windows. We've got our bigger studio spaces. And then we came in and we did all of our flooring and our mirrors and all of the kind of dance specific things. They put, soundproofing between the studio walls and all the fixtures.
So if someone is realizing they're kind of at this point where they feel like their studio is overflowing, it's a little crammed, they're not able to fit in all of the students they want, or they have a waiting list. We always say this is a good problem to have, right?
Yes.
So what would you say to them based on your experience? Is there anything you can do to help prepare them? I mean, they've already heard your journey, but is there anything you would actually specifically say or suggest to them?
Yeah, I would say number one, get a broker. Get a broker for someone to represent you on the spaces. You know, it's similar to a real estate agent. They help you with the negotiations. I was lucky enough, my broker was also a lawyer, because either you have a broker and a lawyer, or I got a combo platter. But you want someone there to represent you during those negotiating process. We were in a unique situation where our build out company was also one of the landlords, one of the owners of our leasing company. So Wonder Woman Construction did our build out. And so that having that broker and having that representation was incredibly helpful. I had done it myself up until that point, but this was leaps and bounds beyond the space search that I had done for the previous two spaces. The fact that it involved such a large construction build out was something I had never dealt with. And so having that broker to kind of guide me through the process was, I just can't say enough good things. And it's just so important, because this is what they do all day, every day. And they just help find those spaces and open up some ideas and some possibilities. And it just helps build your network of connecting to other construction companies if you needed it, for other spaces that we looked at. And definitely, I would say get yourself a broker if you're looking to expand your space and if you're going to need to do any significant build out. And start early, start really early, and make your list of priorities, whether that's taking a survey from your families or just knowing your community. You've got to think about what is going to have the biggest impact for your community. And for us, location was the top priority when looking for a new space. I had looked at a space in West Bloomington, which for those of you not from the Twin Cities, it would have added probably a 30 to 40 minute commute for our families. And so if I had made that, well, it was a beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous space, it would have changed who we were as a community. It would have changed the makeup of our demographic. And that has been such a huge part of who we are. You know, at St. Patrick's Day, we make a point to do community outreach with Minneapolis Public Schools. We touch base with all of our neighborhood schools. So we had built a relationship with the community that we had been in for the past few years. So to make that move, location was our priority. So you've got to sit down and think, what are the biggest things I need? I need more space. Does it have to be in a certain area? Are you trying to reach a new demographic? Are you trying to reach a new market of students? Or are you trying to retain the students that you have and then build on that? And we were very much the latter, trying to retain and preserve our community feel, which is just a big part of what our school is about. So a broker, setting your priorities and starting early, and just a little bit of faith and trust. I'll say that too. Because if you had told me now you have 3 months to move your business with a 3-week-old baby,
yeah,
I would laugh in your face.
now people know it's possible, right? So
right.
If you really focus in on what those priorities are, like you said, those 3 big things, and you can move more quickly and more efficiently because you have the right people working on your behalf and you're very clear about what you need and want. So that's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
You definitely went through something here, and I think it's really going to help other people, because there are a lot of Irish dance teachers who've had to move their studio space, not only to get a larger space. Sometimes it's to downsize a little bit. Sometimes it's because for whatever reason, things have changed with their lease and they're no longer able to stay in the spot they had planned to stay. And that can come up quickly for people too. And then they have to very quickly, like you said, a quick turnaround to find another spot that's going to work for them. So I think even for anyone, at any point, a lot of Irish dance teachers probably will be in a different spot than maybe they start. So I think this is super helpful.
Yeah.
Well, it was so fun interviewing you today, Emily, and I think it's going to be so helpful for everyone listening, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was really fun.